Welcome back to Most Writers Are Fans. My name is Terry Bartley, and I'm your host. So this is going to be a bit of a different episode. So as you guys know, I do a minisode series pretty regularly called Ink Over AI, where I sort of explore the intersection as me a teacher, but also me a writer, and kind of like the way that AI has been like invading both of those spaces, and how do we like deal with it. That podcast actually came from another idea that I was sort of like casually pursuing before it turned into a real thing. So I was really inspired by this article in The Atlantic by a journalist named Rose Horowitch. It was called The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books. And it was sort of about how like students were having trouble like consuming full novels in like a college class setting. It was just kind of like this thing that had been happening over and over and over again. So I have an interview recorded that I was sort of like planning on framing into an episode of this new podcast that was all about kind of like exploring that specific issue of like students reading and reading books and where did this come from? Where is this problem started? How do we solve it? And it just sort of became so clear to me that the problem was so much bigger than just that. And that's where Ink Over AI came from. So basically, this episode is what I'm sort of referring to as like a proto-episode of Ink Over AI, because it is my interview with Rose Horowitch. Now, I didn't record video because I didn't know it was going to become a video podcast at the time. So this is going to be a little different because it's going to be more like audio with images as opposed to like an actual video episode like I typically would do. But I think the content is very good. And I was really excited to talk to somebody like Rose because she has so much expertise in the field. So I hope you enjoy this. I think it was a good conversation. And I will be back next week with a full episode of Most Writers Are Fans. So here's my interview with Rose Horowitch. Yeah, so I chatted with one of your sources. He had mentioned that he sort of noticed a larger issue than just the novel thing, which is just the idea that like technology and sort of attention span, and then also like a lot of like the new AI stuff is making it very hard for students to become critical thinkers and like think for themselves and do their own work and all those things. So I'm sort of wondering, like, based on your interviews, where do you feel like the problem, like, have you noticed any trends of where the problem could be coming from or what you think could be causing it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that that is a real factor. Like that was certainly something that came up a lot in my interviews was, technology. Um, and, it really came up in a couple ways. I guess one was just, the sheer amount of time people spend on their phones and just the fact that like, going on TikTok seems more fun than reading a
Yeah.
book. So it's like you're just spending less time reading. And then and I mean, that's something that, like, I feel myself too, and is hard to fight against. And then also just, one psychologist was talking about how it kind of changes our expectations about what's worthy of attention because we're just, it's like instantly entertaining. And if it's not entertaining, you just scroll to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of, we're not used to being bored and like sticking with something even when it's boring for the hopes of greater, gratification at the end. And so I think that that definitely is something that has come up, that just came up a lot in my reporting. And I didn't focus too much on AI in the article itself, just because I was tracking this as sort of something that started earlier than,
Yeah.
a lot of these large language models did. But I mean, I've been hearing from a lot of teachers since it came out that they're just finding, a lot of essays are written with AI and they're like some teachers are using AI to write their assignments and stuff. So I think that just adds a whole layer of complexity.
Yeah. For the record, I've noticed all this as a high school teacher, both sides of it.
Yeah.
I've for sure, as an English teacher, it
Mm,
is infuriating. Like AI is,
mhm,
I feel like it's an understatement to say it's a bit of the bane of my existence, like these language models, because like it is just very challenging. Because like the reason you do assignments in high school, it's not because I want to know who the main character of a story was or whatever. I
mhm.
want to know what you think about it. Like, give me like you need to
Yeah.
have some opinions for yourself. And so these language models really allow them to just not think at all. And you know,
Mhm.
like you can always tell whenever it's written by something
Yeah.
that's not a student. But then it's like, how do you convince them to not do that? Did you, not even necessarily for that specific issue, but like just to like motivate kids to do anything, I guess is the is the right way to phrase it. Have you read into anything that like any common threads that people have been doing to try to address it?
Yeah, people definitely talked about, kind of trying to almost train students to like re-engage with things. And I mean, a lot of teachers like, I think I was very empathetic to like what they're describing. Like it's very it's very challenging when your students arrive and it's hard for them to read and then it's hard for them to want to read and it's like what do you do as a teacher to, make them want to read is hard. But I think teachers, seemed to find some success in some talked about doing a lot of kind of individual reading and trying to get students excited that way, in addition to whole class books, and also just trying to kind of retrain students, scaling up the amount of time you were kind of focusing on something for, an extended period of time. And so I think those were some tactics that I was hearing about. But it also seems like from my reporting that it still very much an open question and people weren't exactly sure what to do, particularly just because some things that some teachers talked about was that it was also hard to, it's like grades aren't as much of
Motivation.
a motivation or kind of, anymore, and it's harder to use those. So it's like, what tools do you actually have at your disposal? Yeah.
Because you know, like I can give kids zeros for things, or like give them giant quizzes for
Mhm.
reading comprehension just to like prove that they've read a thing. But if they don't care, if they fail, like what do you do? You know, like
Yeah.
it really is challenging because it's like, how do
Mhm.
you address that? And I have a feeling it's a larger cultural problem, and part of
Mhm.
me feels like that stems from the pandemic. And I think that part of it is just because kids missed 2 full years basically of education. And I don't think it matters where that landed. If you missed it at all, like you're going to be deficient in some skills, right? Like you just will be. As a high school English teacher, my job is not to teach grammar. My job is to like teach you to think and things like that. And it's like, how do you do that? Because I wasn't taught that in college, right? Like I was
Mhm.
taught to teach them like these more critical thinking skills. So I think that
Mhm.
that's maybe part of the issue is it's like, because we promoted them on to the next grade, like the teachers just aren't equipped to give them those like rudimentary supplemental skills. So
Mhm.
it's a thing I've been running into that it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a solution to it, and it seems that like the solution might just be like waiting the 12 years until we get a new generation that didn't miss that, and that feels like 12 years of students that are behind. Like, do you feel like that might
Mhm.
be a larger issue in like the workforce and things like that if this keeps going the way it has been?
Yes, I mean, definitely the pandemic was something that came up in my reporting as, you're just it was a lot harder to teach people with remote school. And so, teachers have really noticed like a marked shift since then. And I mean, in my family, a lot of my family members are teachers, and a lot of them, I mean, yeah, I had one who was teaching like first graders on Zoom, and it's like impossible to get
Yeah.
them to pay attention or learn anything. And I think that that is a like urgent issue, given just what we've seen with NAEP scores and kind of a widening achievement gap. It definitely is, does not bode well. So I think it is very much of like a still a question of just like how do we make that up, because it's just not something that, obviously there were some funds, but it doesn't seem like something that we really know how to respond to.
So, what did you talk to any of the students about like where they feel like it's coming from? Have you sort of like read into any of that on that side of it?
One thing that, like, from a student side, I feel like something that came up was that, and this is something that I mentioned in the article, because it also did come up with some professors, was just that there's so many other pressures on their time. Like, even if they're not, you're not spending time on social media or anything, there's just so much pressure to get a job, to do extracurriculars, all these other things, ways that you can fill your time. And so, that is sort of maybe a larger societal shift where we're saying like these things are more important than reading and just reading for fun, um, or reading to even fulfill all your assignments. And so I think that is something that like has been a real challenge, I guess, for students, is just the fact that there's just so much pressure to do these other things and get into college and then get a job
Yeah.
that makes it harder to.
Yeah, I think it makes some sense when you think about the populations you were talking to. Because the one thing
Yeah.
I noticed when I spoke with the Georgetown professor was my populations are different than his populations, right? I live
Mhm.
in a small town in West Virginia in a public school.
Yeah.
So like my kids, maybe one of my kids might go to somewhere like Georgetown, but I still feel like there's some consistency there because like there's not a
Mhm.
lot of kids that read as casually these days, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not sort of like a hobby that's pushed as much. And the number of students I've been having students do book reports this past month or so. And just the number of them that I'll have read for 10 minutes consecutively be like, I just can't do it. And it's like, I don't know what that is. Like, what is
Yeah.
that stemming from? And I do wonder, like, if there's like anything to. I think that maybe digging into the broader cultural problem, but also like I don't think you're wrong, but also I don't think it's a new problem, right? Like I think if you
Yeah.
ask any kids from any college kids from any time period, why can't you do your readings? They'll say, well, I'm just so busy, right? Like I think
Yeah.
that college kids are always have that mindset.
Definitely. I quoted in my article, yeah, someone worrying about this in like 1979. So it's it's certainly not like a new, people are always worried about young people's reading. It's not a new thing. And so yeah, so I definitely think that, there is something to the idea that, students might have always been busy, but there also are some like concrete things that we can really track changing. Like, we know that the pandemic is going to be something that's really unprecedented. We know that we've seen this shift in kind of educational pedagogy, I guess, and, more of a shift towards teaching excerpts and teaching informational texts. And so that's something that like we can track more easily. And then we also, I guess, have just seen more. I mean, certainly I know that it's not always generalizable, but more kind of grade inflation and therefore more of a and students just increasingly spending more time on extracurriculars or jobs. And so yeah, I mean, definitely it's, young people like statistically have always read a lot less than older people. Yeah, there was one survey that it made me sad, but it was talking about how like eighth graders, fewer and fewer are saying that like reading's one of their favorite activities or that they enjoy going to the library. So yeah, so there is some evidence that like it's really, these things, some of it is new.
And one thing I can say as a teacher
Yeah.
that I'm also sort of curious if this came up when you're reporting too, is this idea that like for a lot of English teachers, a lot of our lesson plans that they are like proposed lesson plans, like things that you can
Yeah.
get on through textbooks and things, will suggest not reading full novels, but reading like excerpts of novels or reading
Yeah.
like to still give them the content, but then not have them read. And I feel like that's sort of a disservice to students because it's not they're not building up the endurance to read a full book, right? And
Yeah.
the number of times that kids have told me in their class when we've listened to like an audiobook in class, they'll say, "This is the first book I've read." And it's like, that's wild.
Yeah.
This is the first book you've read fully through, which they could be exaggerating. They could have not remembered it, whatever, whatever.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that could be a factor as well? That there's less focus on the full novel in like secondary?
That is definitely something that I think could be a factor. Throughout my reporting, people were talking about how No Child Left Behind and the Common Core kind of really emphasized like informational texts and standardized tests. And, I spoke with one education professor at Stanford who was saying like this, came from a really good place. Like, you want students to be able to, make succinct arguments and analyze text, but then, he said that we also kind of destroyed young people's ability to like read long form texts because we just don't ask them to do it, and it
Yeah.
just makes it seem so much more insurmountable because it's not something you have experience with. So that was something that came up over and over, as a potential cause.
Yeah, and I just sort of wonder because you see it all the time, like these like educational trends that kind of like impact the larger society.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of happening now with the humanities, because you hear about like humanities having a lower enrollment than like other fields, and I think this could also be a factor with the whole like kids not wanting to read or whatever, which is the idea that like we've been pushing kids to go to like vocational school and like STEM for quite some time
Mhm.
now, right? Like we've been pushing that for quite
Yeah.
some time, and I feel like that's maybe now impacting humanities, which means, and I think that the real problem there, which is sort of like the real danger, is that I think that it's very in the current environment, especially if you're not like, you know, an Ivy League person. I think that it's easy to logically say, well, of course I shouldn't go into humanities. It doesn't pay well, or it doesn't.
Mhm.
It's harder work, or whatever. Like I have to
Yeah.
think too hard, or whatever. And I wonder if that also could be a factor of like kids not in like they don't see the appeal of like fiction or you know creative
Mhm.
nonfiction or any of that kind of writing.
Mhm. I think that's definitely a factor. Professors I spoke with said that who taught humanities courses said that students would say like, "I loved this class, but I'm going to do something that's more useful to my career. Like I'm going to study economics or computer science or something that, gives me much more marketable skills." And so I think yeah, we have just done a sort of bad job of making the case for the humanities, given that it seems like other things would make it so much easier for you to get a job. And so it's challenging, I guess, to think about, okay, like how would we work our way back from that? Convince people of their value.
And I'm sure it's a thing that you think about too, right? Because like the Atlantic relies on people that care about the humanities to succeed, right? Like in the long run.
Yes, and so in this article, I mean, I spoke with people because I was trying to hear like, okay, what is the case? Why does this matter if people aren't reading? Can you just get the same information on
Yeah.
TikTok? And you know, they were talking about kind of what reading really does like for you in your mind, just like the act of reading does. I spoke with one with this neuroscientist, Marianne Wolf, who talks about deep reading and how it really helps you to think critically and kind of hold multiple arguments in your mind at once, that it leads you to reflect on your own life, and that you just kind of can't get that from skimming or taking in information another way. So I do think that, yeah, that there is something really important about reading, and I was trying to kind of make that case in the article a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that is just like you see a lot of like distrusted institutions these days, and especially things like journalism, especially like the media broadly speaking. And I think that that's maybe part of it. If you think that seeing a headline on Facebook is as valuable as reading a full article that gives you context, then like what do you do with that, right?
Yeah, and there was a good article in the New Yorker a while ago, but it was talking about how, people who read more, I believe, are more like civically engaged and more likely to vote. So I think it also kind of correlates with a lot of good habits. And so yeah, so it is important to make the case for reading.
Yeah, and I just think that it like it does you do worry about what does 10 years from now look like, right? Like if there's no young people involved in not obviously not no, but like a much
Mhm,
lower element of young people involved in like any of these fields, because I think the thing that we often forget is the humanities is not just journalism and literature. It's like psychology and like all these other fields that are
mhm,
really important. And like what do you do without, because I think that what the humanities does is it provides context for our world, right? That we're living in.
mhm,
And if you don't have that, then like you don't know how to navigate it. And I think that is very dangerous in this time where
mhm.
like a lot of things are being threatened, and if you don't understand why they're happening, then you may just believe the things people are telling you, you know, the things that the leaders are telling you.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see, like, over time, whether this trend continues or, I think there have been some universities that, like, have found success. I think it was the University of California, Berkeley, that was successful at kind of getting people to enroll in their English departments. And so, I wonder if it will kind of turn the tide at some point, and humanities will sort of experience a resurgence, and people will want to enroll, or whether we'll kind of continue this decline in just having students study those disciplines.
So what advice do you think you would have for, I guess, even though this isn't the people you were necessarily talking to, for like secondary teachers, like what do you think we should do? Like what would you suggest we do to try to address this at an earlier stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to like recognize the problem and then I mean, speaking with people, there are I mean, I think they're just trying people who have kind of written to me in since the article came out and talked about success. I think they just were talking about, even if they could almost inspire like one student to just end up loving reading, like that is a real like tangible good in the world. And so I think just trying to find a way to to I guess encourage that joy in reading and like make a case for the value of reading in the humanities, which obviously I know is easier said than done. But I think that was what people were just excited about.
Yeah, let me
Yeah.
ask a question that's similar but different, which is, do you remember what inspired your love of reading, and what was that book? What was that moment like for you?
Honestly, okay, I feel like my story is worse than my sister's story because my sister, she did not like reading at all when she was in elementary school. And I think her teacher gave her this like really fun book that she kind of thought that she would really enjoy and made her write like an extra book report on it, which seems like it would not be an enjoyable experience, but that really got her hooked on reading. And then she started reading after that. Um, for me, I think honestly, I mean, I feel very lucky, but I think it was like reading with my parents and having my parents read to me. And I know that that's not like an experience that everyone, has, but that like connection with my family and associating that with reading was to me, I think what got me, on the path of really loving books.
Yeah, so just to kind of wrap up a little bit with a bit of more of a fun question, what are you reading right now? What are you enjoying reading right now?
Okay, this is gonna sound like I'm lying, but I'm actually trying to read War and Peace, and I have I mean, I also, find myself it's hard to not like pick up your phone after just a couple pages, but I'm making my way through. And particularly when I'm on the subway in the morning and I have no cell service, we're getting through it. I really like the peace sections, and I'm not so wild about the war ones, but yeah, it's good.
Honestly,
Um,
honestly, I
yeah,
love that because
yeah,
I'm a new teacher. This is my fourth year
yeah,
teaching, and I've been switching up
yeah,
grades. I think that this is
yeah.
I've taught every grade in high school each year that I've been
Oh
a
wow.
teacher.
Yeah.
So I've been doing a different curriculum every time.
Yeah.
But because of that, I've been reading a lot of classic novels that I hadn't read. And it
Mhm.
has been a really cool, fulfilling experience because I think that you're right that in the modern world, it doesn't seem appealing to read classic stuff because there's so much new
Mhm.
stuff that you want to read, right? But I think that there
Yeah.
is value in reading last year I read Frankenstein and Brave New World for the first time.
Mhm.
And those are both
Yeah.
really like seminal pieces that I think are also
Yeah.
really informative of the world that we live in now. So yeah,
Mhm.
I love that you're reading War and Peace. I think that that's fun, and also it does feel like the thing to say if you just want to.
I know. I was like, this sounds like I'm lying, or trying to be so pretentious. But
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about like diversifying the canon because the canon is very
yeah.
white and male, right?
Mhm.
Have you done any reporting? Has it that come up at all? I'm sure it has at the Atlantic. I'm sure that's the thing people are talking about there.
Yes, definitely. And certainly when I was a student, and I think that that was something that, this course at Columbia that I wrote about, they had definitely been, diversifying the canon and their offerings. And I think that that was something that they found like great success in and that, students really did connect with and enjoy those works and kind of, opening it up because there's yeah, a lot of classic works by you know, authors of color.
Yeah, and two, it would just I think that maybe that would be one way to maybe open up the or fill the gap that we're missing in the fields, right? If you can get people that maybe felt not as welcome in the humanities to feel a bit more welcome, that might be one way to do that. All right, well, thank you so much, Rose. This has been a lot of fun to talk about, and like I said, I just think it's fun for me to get an origin story.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. No, this was a very fun podcast. I'm sorry that I don't feel like I have good advice because I was just like reporting on it, but I'm like, I don't know what to do. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. Bye.